The city of Bellington glittered below like a sea of gold, its skyline piercing the clouds as night wrapped the world in velvet. Inside Terminal 4 of Starjet Airways, a sleek airline known for its glossy marketing and lofty promises of elevated travel. The air buzzed with announcements and tired footsteps. A red-eye flight was preparing for takeoff. Passengers moved like shadows under the bright fluorescent lights, their faces tired, their voices hushed. Among them walked a woman whose presence didn't demand attention, but somehow held it. Her name was Danielle Moore. She wore a soft cream sweater and wide-legged trousers, her coiled hair pulled back in a low, elegant bun. In one arm, she cradled a tiny baby swaddled in lemon-yellow cotton. Her name was Lila, only a few months old, her breaths still delicate, her eyes full of the mystery of life. Danielle wasn't here for business or leisure. She was returning home after a private trip overseas, one tied to the airline itself. Not that anyone knew, not that anyone asked. She boarded Flight 708 without fanfare, just another mother with a child in her arms. First class was quiet. The lighting was dimmed to a soft golden hue, casting long shadows on the polished cabin floor. Most of the passengers were already settled, flipping through magazines or sipping water from crystal-clear tumblers. Danielle quietly took her seat in 1A, placed her bag gently under her feet, and rocked Lila in slow circles. The baby whimpered. Not loud, just enough for her mother to know. It was time. Danielle pulled a thin blanket over her shoulder and adjusted, her baby under it, guiding Lila to feed. Her movements were practiced and graceful. She had done this in hotel lobbies, in parked cars, in her own office. Why should an airplane be any different? But that's when it happened. A pair of heeled shoes clicked toward her, then a sharp voice sliced through the calm like cold wind. "Excuse me, ma'am," the voice said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can't do that here. This is first class." Danielle looked up. A flight attendant stood before her, arms folded across her navy blazer. Her badge said, "Charlotte." Her tone said something else entirely. Danielle blinked, unsure if she heard correctly. She leaned slightly, forward, keeping her voice low. "I'm just feeding my daughter. She was hungry." Charlotte didn't soften. "And I understand that. But we do have standards in this cabin. You need to be more discreet. There are other passengers here." Discreet? Danielle's chest tightened. She glanced around. Across the aisle, a man in a tailored gray suit looked up from his newspaper. His brow furrowed. A woman with silver earrings sitting by the window offered a fleeting glance before lowering her gaze. Nobody spoke. But everyone heard. Danielle adjusted the blanket again, making sure nothing was visible. Her face flushed with heat. "I am covered," she said, softly but clearly. Charlotte's voice sharpened. "Then perhaps you'd be more comfortable continuing in the lavatory, or we can arrange for you to move to the rear cabin." Lila shifted in her arms, sensing the rising tension. Her small hand clutched Danielle's blouse. For a moment, Danielle said nothing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask why. She just took a long, steady breath and reached for her phone with trembling fingers. She typed a single message. "Charlotte told me to stop feeding Lila in first class. Flight 708, seat 1A. She hit send. Not a word was spoken around her. No one asked Charlotte to stop. No one questioned her tone. Danielle might as well have been invisible, except she wasn't. Charlotte, the attendant with the hard expression, had just made the worst decision of her career. Danielle turned her phone face down on the tray and looked out the window. The sky was ink black now. Stars blinked in the distance like eyes too far to help. Her heartbeat thudded like drum beats under her ribs. She brushed her lips over Lila's forehead and rocked her slowly, breathing through the ache blooming in her chest. Not sadness, not fear, but something sharper. a quiet kind of fury. At the front of the cabin, Charlotte resumed checking the drink cart with smug detachment. Another attendant, younger and clearly newer, watched from the side galley. Her name tag read Clara. Clara stepped forward hesitantly. "Was something wrong?" she asked. Charlotte waved it off. "No big deal. Just someone who thinks this is a daycare. It's first class, not a living room." Clara looked past her. Her eyes found Danielle. She didn't speak, but her posture changed. Tension drew into her shoulders like breath held too long. Back in seat 1A, Danielle's phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. What seat? Who was it? The sender, Ryan Moore, her husband, co-founder of Starjet Airways. Danielle typed quickly, "Seat 1A. Her name is Charlotte. Told me to stop feeding Lila. Suggested bathroom or back row." Moments later, another reply came. "Don't move. Don't speak. I'll take care of it." Danielle exhaled. She tucked the blanket tighter around her baby and closed her eyes. She didn't know exactly what Ryan would do, but she knew him well enough to feel the calm before a coming storm. He wouldn't rage. He wouldn't shout. But when something mattered, truly mattered, he acted with a precision that made people tremble. Up in the cockpit, the captain of Flight 708, Henry Wallace, was reviewing fuel logs when the call light on his in-flight phone blinked red. A direct line from ground operations. That never happened unless it was serious. He picked up the receiver. "This is Captain Wallace." A composed but serious tone answered. "Captain, this is Control Operations. We've received an urgent message from Mr. Ryan Moore. He's listed as co-founder of Starjet Airways. His wife is on your flight. Seat 1A. There's been an incident. A flight attendant named Charlotte reportedly asked her to stop breastfeeding. Mr. Moore is requesting immediate internal review." Wallace sat up straighter. "His wife is aboard?" "Confirmed, sir." "And he's requested the staff member be brought to the cockpit immediately. Copy that? I'll handle it." He returned the receiver to its cradle, his eyes narrowing as he turned to his co-pilot, Jackson, a sharp-minded junior who glanced up, sensing the tension. Wallace nodded once, then tapped the overhead intercom. A doubled chime echoed softly through the aircraft. In the galley, Charlotte was sipping from a styrofoam cup, chatting lightly with another crew member. Her conversation halted mid-sentence. She looked up, blinking. Then came the announcement. "Lead Attendant Charlotte, please report to the cockpit." The words floated through the cabin with an invisible weight. Charlotte straightened her uniform. With both hands, quickly brushed her hair behind her ears, and began her walk toward the front. Her heels tapped quietly against the aisle carpet, crisp and composed. But inside, her stomach coiled. Most passengers didn't glance up, except one Danielle Moore. From seat 1A, Danielle watched with calm, unreadable eyes. There was no glare, no confrontation, just stillness. Her baby, Lila, slept peacefully against her chest, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. Danielle's fingers gently rested over her daughter's tiny back. Charlotte reached the cockpit. The door opened before she could knock. Captain Wallace stood there, stern and unreadable. "Come in," he said. The door sealed shut behind her. "Close it," Wallace added. Charlotte obeyed, the click echoing louder than it should have. He wasted no time. "We've received a complaint regarding your interaction with Mrs. Danielle Moore, seat 1A. Did you tell her to stop breastfeeding?" Charlotte stood tall. "Captain, I followed professional decorum. The act was quite visible. I thought it might discomfort other passengers. I suggested she be more discreet or use the lavatory." "Was she covered?" Wallace asked without emotion. "She had a blanket, yes, but—" "Did she violate any policy?" Charlotte paused. "Technically, no, sir." That's when another voice joined them, through the cockpit speaker. "I'm sure she didn't break any rules," said a smooth, clear male voice, "because there are no rules against feeding a child in comfort." Charlotte turned toward the source of the voice, her skin crawling with realization. "Mr. Moore?" she whispered. Yes, he said, firm. And you just publicly humiliated my wife because of your own discomfort, not because of her behavior. I didn't know, Charlotte stammered. You didn't need to know, Ryan interrupted, voice like ice. You needed to treat her with dignity, with fairness. You didn't. Instead, you turned her into a spectacle in a space she had every right to occupy. That's not professionalism. That's prejudice. Silence followed. Here's what will happen, Ryan continued. You will return to that cabin. You will apologize in front of the passengers. If my wife chooses to move, you will escort her politely. If she stays, you will stand silent. And once that aircraft touches down, you'll walk into a meeting with the executive board. Am I clear? Charlotte could barely speak. Her throat had gone dry. Yes. Yes, sir. Wallace gave her one nod. Then go. Charlotte opened the door slowly. She stepped back into the soft hum of the plane, but the hallway felt narrower, the lights somehow brighter, the silence heavier. She walked past seat after seat, but this time it wasn't a confident stroll. Her stride slowed. Her shoulders drooped. She was walking through fog, the kind that revealed every stare, every whisper not spoken aloud. Some passengers glanced up as she passed. A man lowered his magazine just slightly. A woman adjusted her scarf, but kept her eyes locked ahead. Charlotte reached 1A. Danielle hadn't moved. Her eyes still watched the clouds outside. Her baby lay still and safe against her heart. Charlotte crouched beside her, lowering her voice just enough for privacy, but loud enough for those near to hear. Mrs. Moore, she began, breath shaky. I want to offer a sincere apology. My behavior earlier was inappropriate, and I deeply regret asking you to stop feeding your daughter. It was a misunderstanding. Danielle slowly turned her face toward her. Her gaze was soft but piercing. You think it was a misunderstanding? She asked, voice low. Charlotte hesitated. I misjudged the situation. You didn't tell anyone else to leave, Danielle continued. You saw me. You assumed something. And you made sure everyone else could hear it. That wasn't policy. That was personal. Her words settled like dust across the quiet cabin. A man in a charcoal suit cleared his throat and looked away. A woman beside the window quietly set down her glass of wine. Charlotte's eyes burned. You're right. I was wrong, and I'm very sorry. Danielle glanced down at her baby. She gently adjusted the blanket across Lila's back, then looked up once more. Apology accepted, she said. But remember, how you speak matters more than what you say. Charlotte nodded, blinking fast. Then she rose slowly and turned, the eyes of the cabin trailing behind her as she walked back down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. The aisle felt endless now. Each row Charlotte passed felt like a slow climb up a mountain of stairs. The once routine cabin, with its muted lighting and quiet passengers, had transformed into a stage, and she was the only actor under the spotlight. Shame clung to her like a second skin. Even the walls of the aircraft felt closer somehow, the air tighter. As she approached the galley, she passed Maya, who silently stepped aside to let her through. The younger attendant didn't make eye contact. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She reached the back counter and stopped, her hands gripping the stainless steel surface like she was holding on to the last bit of control. The metal felt colder than she remembered. Maybe it was the nerves. Maybe it was the humiliation still sinking in. Maya stood a few paces away, quietly stacking glasses. For a while, there was only the soft clink of glass against glass, and the drone of the engines in the background. Then Maya's voice came, low but clear. You all right? Charlotte didn't answer at first. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes glued to the tray in front of her like it held the answers to everything. That was unexpected. Maya didn't look up. Was it? Or did you just expect no one would ever push back? The question pierced Charlotte like a pin to a balloon. She turned her head, her voice sharp. What's that supposed to mean? Maya kept stacking calmly. It means this isn't the first time. I've seen it. You always question certain passengers more than others. You linger longer by their seats. You give them that look. Charlotte's grip on the counter tightened. I was just doing my job. We have expectations, presentation, comfort, protocol. And who gets to decide who fits those expectations? Maya asked gently. You saw a mother feeding her baby and thought it didn't belong in first class. Charlotte looked away. She wanted to argue. She wanted to explain. But no words came, because deep down she knew it wasn't really about policy. It was about the image in her mind, about instinct, about assumption. And the woman she saw in seat 1A didn't fit that image. That was the truth, and it stung. Back in seat 1A, Danielle exhaled slowly. Her chest still held traces of the earlier tension, but a strange peace was beginning to settle. Lila had drifted, back to sleep, her tiny breaths warm against Danielle's collarbone. Danielle leaned back into the seat and closed her eyes for a moment. She hadn't boarded the flight expecting this. She hadn't dressed for a confrontation. She wore no symbols of power, no designer name tags or flashy jewels, just soft clothes, for a long flight, a baby to care for, and the quiet desire for peace. But the moment had come to her anyway, and she had stood her ground. This wasn't just about her. That's what pulsed through her chest now. It was about every woman who had felt the burn of shame while feeding her child. Every passenger who had been sized up for not fitting the mold. Every mother who had been hushed in public spaces for simply being a mother. And every quiet face that had watched, listened, but said nothing. Her phone buzzed. Danielle glanced down and opened the message from Ryan. You handled that perfectly. I've spoken with the captain again. Charlotte will be met by security when you land. We're reviewing her record. Danielle read it twice. Her face didn't change. There was no triumphant grin, no air of vengeance. Only calm. The kind that came from being certain of your own dignity. She typed a reply with a slow, steady hand. Don't make it personal. Make it policy. She set the phone aside and looked out the window again. The clouds had thickened below the aircraft, like a gray ocean stretching endlessly beneath them. The city lights were gone now, swallowed by the dark sky. But inside her, something glowed. It wasn't pride. It was clarity. The flight crept on, slow and heavy. The hum of the engines felt lower now, like the plane itself was dragging a weight behind it. Charlotte didn't return to the cabin. She stayed in the galley, endlessly rearranging silverware, wiping down trays that didn't need cleaning. Her hands moved, but her mind was elsewhere, stuck in a loop. A sentence replayed like a haunting song. Your tone speaks louder than your words. It had hit her harder than the captain's call, harder than Ryan Moore's voice in the cockpit, because it was true, and it echoed in every corner of her thoughts. She tried to shake it off, but the silence around her made it worse. Maya only spoke when absolutely necessary. She took over all the passenger care, offering drinks, adjusting pillows, smiling, politely checking on requests. Everything Charlotte had once done with ease, and the worst part? Maya did it better, with more warmth, more presence, more grace. Charlotte realized for the first time how much dignity had nothing to do with rank. In seat 1A, Danielle hadn't moved an inch. She didn't look like someone who had won a battle. She didn't flaunt her name or her status. She didn't whisper to anyone, didn't complain again. She just sat with her baby, her phone open to an article she wasn't really reading. Every so often, she reached down and stroked Lila's tiny hand with the edge of her thumb. But the other passengers noticed. They noticed the silence that now surrounded Charlotte. They noticed the soft strength in the woman by the window. And they noticed the shift in the air, a quiet reckoning that had nothing to do with altitude. The same passengers who had looked away earlier now watched Danielle differently. The hush that once held ignorance now carried weight, guilt in some eyes, curiosity in others. Though no one dared speak to her directly, the glances that passed her way had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. Across the aisle, Mr. Pritchard, who had spent the flight buried in finance articles, shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat quietly and leaned in just enough to catch her attention. "Excuse me," he said, voice low and unsure. "I just wanted to say what happened earlier shouldn't have happened. That wasn't right." Danielle looked up, surprised. For a moment, she just blinked at him, then gave a polite, calm nod. "Thank you." He seemed ready to say more, but hesitated, lips parting before pressing together again. He nodded once more, then leaned back into his seat. Silent again, but now with eyes that saw more than they had before. Farther down the cabin, a woman, named Grace, typed rapidly on her phone. Her brows furrowed, fingers dancing across the screen. Maybe she was messaging her daughter, maybe a close friend. But whatever the recipient, the words likely painted a picture of what she had witnessed. Not just a flight, but a moment that cracked open something deeper. The story now lived in every passenger. Monica's cutting voice had echoed through the space earlier, but it was Danielle's quiet strength that remained. Her stillness had weight. It pressed into the silence, shifted the current. In the cockpit, Captain Ellison was on another call. His voice was steady, but his grip on the armrest was tighter than before. On the other end was Ryan's assistant. "We've reviewed Charlotte's prior records," the voice said flatly. "This isn't her first infraction. There are patterns." "Bias related?" the captain asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, always framed as minor. Comfort, discretion, tone. But the pattern is there. Ryan wants it addressed. A full hearing is scheduled." "Understood," Captain Ellison said before ending the call. He sat back for a second, glancing at the darkening sky. Below, the city lights had begun to twinkle, growing closer. They were starting descent. In the galley, Charlotte's phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket with a trembling hand. One look at the message and her stomach twisted. "Scheduled disciplinary review. Tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Location, Executive Boardroom B. Status required." The message might as well have been a stone in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she locked the screen and shoved it back into her pocket. 10 years of spotless leadership. Gone. One choice, one moment of instinct, and everything cracked. Back in her seat, Danielle glanced at her watch. Just under 40 minutes left. She bent forward slightly, whispering into Lila's sleeping ear. "Almost there, sweetheart." But deep down, she knew this was more than just the end of a flight. This was a beginning of a bigger change. And it wasn't about revenge. It was about correction, about taking silence and giving it a voice. The plane began its descent, but the heaviness inside the cabin didn't lift. If anything, it thickened. The familiar ding of the seatbelt sign sounded. Passengers clicked their belts in. No one reached for bags. No one chatted. The shift in the cabin wasn't just felt. It was shared. Danielle sat straighter, her hand resting gently over Lila's small chest. Her face hadn't changed since Charlotte's apology, but the air around her told a story. Respect didn't. "Need volume." Her phone buzzed once more. "A new message from Ryan. Security will meet her at the gate. She's being escorted. I'll be waiting for you both." Danielle read it, then replied. "Let the process speak louder than the punishment." She slipped the phone into her bag and looked out the window. At the front, Charlotte stood like a statue near the galley wall. Arms crossed, shoulders hunched, her once sharp posture now dull and unsure. She hadn't returned to the cabin. She hadn't said another word. She only hoped to be forgotten, but forgetfulness wasn't coming. Only consequences. Maya passed with a tray in hand, pausing for just a second. "They're sending someone," she murmured. Charlotte's response was barely audible. "I know." "Do you understand why?" A pause. A long one. Then a small nod. "Yes." Maya stood in silence for a beat longer, then walked away. The damage was done. Captain Ellison's voice broke the silence overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning our final descent. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground shortly. Thank you for flying with us." Danielle stared out the window. The clouds were breaking, the city below flickering like a sea of stars. She had flown more times than she could count. But this flight was different. Heavier. More honest. She glanced at her daughter's face. Peaceful. Unbothered. "One day," she whispered, "you'll understand why I didn't stay silent." The landing gear thudded against the tarmac. No applause followed. No fidgeting. No chatter. Just stillness. Everyone waited. The plane taxied toward the gate, wheels humming softly beneath. In the cabin, the silence tightened. Not a word. Not a sound of zippers or overhead bins. Only darting eyes and shallow breaths. Danielle adjusted Lila, patting her gently. She didn't wake. Danielle's eyes drifted to the front of the cabin where Charlotte stood. Small, unsteady, alone. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Then came a new voice. This time, not the captain's. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. There will be a brief delay for crew procedures. Thank you for your patience." No one moved. The aircraft door opened. Two men in black suits stepped in, followed by a woman in a navy blazer with an executive badge. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The lead officer looked directly at Charlotte. "Lead Flight Attendant Charlotte." Her name dropped like a pin in a cathedral. She took a breath, wiped her palms against her skirt, and stepped forward. "Yes, that's me." The woman nodded. "You'll come with us. Incident review, immediate questioning." Charlotte searched the cabin with her eyes, looking for a reason, an excuse, a lifeline. But there was none. Her gaze met Danielle's. Just a second. No anger, no smile, no victory. Just calm. Charlotte walked down the aisle, flanked by officers. Passengers leaned away slightly as she passed. No one spoke. No one reached out. At the door, she looked once more toward Maya. But Maya was busy helping an elderly woman with her seatbelt. She didn't look back. The door shut behind them, and the entire cabin exhaled, still. No one moved. The entire cabin held its breath, suspended in that moment between knowing and reacting. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from peace. It came from reckoning. A shared, invisible weight had settled on every shoulder. Then, like a ripple across still water, the captain's voice returned, smooth but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now cleared to begin deplaning." The seatbelt clicks began slowly. The usual scramble for overhead bins never came. People stood, yes, but cautiously. The tone of the flight had shifted, and every passenger felt it, even the ones who had stayed silent, especially them. Danielle rose quietly from her seat, adjusting the soft wrap around Lila's sleeping form. The baby was still lost in slumber, her tiny fist curled against her mother's chest. Mr. Pritchard, who earlier offered his apology, stepped aside quickly, his eyes respectful and downcast. "Ma'am," he said simply, with a nod. Danielle gave him a small, polite smile. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between them was enough. She stepped into the aisle, the faint light from the windows casting long shadows down the narrow space. The hush in the cabin followed her, a quiet escort of reverence and discomfort. As she passed row after row, passengers parted like tide around her. No one offered eye contact, but many sneaked glances, and every one of them carried something different. Shame, reflection, quiet admiration. The jet bridge was cold, dimly lit, and lined with muted walls. Waiting at the end of it stood a man in a charcoal gray suit, immaculately pressed, his expression composed but his eyes searching. Ryan. He stepped forward before Danielle reached him, wordlessly taking the carry-on from her shoulder and slipping it onto his own. His other hand reached out to cradle the back of Lila's head as he kissed her forehead gently. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice nearly lost in the echo of the empty corridor. Danielle met his eyes. "We're okay," she replied, steady as ever. He scanned her face, as if trying to read beneath the calm surface for any cracks. But there were none, only grace, only quiet resolve. He nodded. "They're waiting for me." She gave him a look that didn't ask him to stay. It asked him to do what mattered. "Then go do the right thing, not just for me." He understood. No more words were needed. Danielle turned and walked down the terminal, Lila still nestled against her. Her steps were light, but her presence was heavy. A mother, a woman, a witness. Behind her, Ryan moved toward the private wing of the airport. Behind those secure doors, decisions were waiting, not just about one employee, but about the culture that had quietly tolerated her. The executive boardroom was a sleek, cold space with a wall of glass overlooking the runway. Afternoon light spilled across polished stone, making sharp lines, out of everything. The table was long and surrounded by power, HR leads, operations chiefs, legal counsels, and 2 board members from the airline's top brass. The silence was thick. At the head sat Ryan, no papers in hand, no slideshow, just a calm presence and a digital folder on the table in front of him. He didn't fidget. He didn't glance around. He waited. When the door opened, it did so with a hush. Charlotte stepped in, flanked by a compliance officer. Her uniform looked the same, but everything else was diminished. Her stance, her expression, the confidence she once carried like a badge. Now she moved like someone searching for footing on unfamiliar ground. "Have a seat," Ryan said, his voice low but firm. She obeyed. The legal director took over, reading through the procedural script with no inflection. This wasn't theater. This was review, misconduct, incident, passenger, first class, child, humiliation. The words piled one after another, each a stone on Charlotte's already heavy back. Ryan barely spoke during the reading, until it came time for one question. Why her? Charlotte's voice cracked. Because she didn't look like the others. The answer sucked all oxygen from the room. There were no gasps, no outbursts, just the long, sharp edge of truth finally named. Ryan leaned forward slightly. 10 years. That's how long you've served this airline. 10 years of trust, of responsibility. You've made calls before. But today, you didn't just misjudge. You chose. And your choice told us everything. She tried to protest, her voice soft and shaking. I didn't know who she was. That's the problem, Ryan replied. You shouldn't have needed to. The director placed Charlotte on unpaid suspension, pending final board review. As the compliance officer guided her out, Ryan said his last piece, not with anger, but clarity. I won't allow this again. Not from you, not from anyone. The system will change, and if it doesn't, I'll change it myself. Charlotte said nothing. She left. The door clicked shut. Far away from the boardroom, in a quiet lounge reserved for airline executives and their families, Danielle sat in stillness. The noise of the terminal was gone. Here, only quiet remained. Leather seats, wide windows, shadows, stretched across the floor. Danielle gently rocked Lila in her arms. The child's breathing was slow, even. Her fingers curled around a fold in her mother's blouse. Danielle's own breathing matched that rhythm. Not because she was calming Lila, but because after everything, she needed to calm herself. It wasn't just to soothe her daughter, it was to steady herself. She hadn't cried, not once, not during the flight, not during the apology, not even when Monica had been escorted away. But now, as she sat in the quiet, holding her child, the weight of it all settled deep into her bones. It wasn't a silence of peace. It was a silence full of echoes, echoes of cold stares, of swallowed shame, of the way Monica's voice had sliced through the cabin like a blade. Danielle looked down at Lila's tiny face, still asleep, undisturbed by the whirlwind that had raged around them. "You won't remember this," she whispered, brushing her lips gently against her daughter's temple. "But I will. Every second." The door opened with a soft click. Ryan stepped in, his tie loosened, his jacket gone. His posture was steady, but his eyes carried the weariness of a man who had spent hours fighting a storm with his mind. He crossed the room in silence, knelt slightly, and kissed Lila's forehead. Then he sat beside Danielle without a word. "It's done?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. He nodded. "She admitted it, in front of everyone." Danielle blinked. "She actually said it?" "She did," Ryan confirmed, but only after it was far too late. They sat in stillness, the low hum of ventilation the only sound around them. Danielle's fingers traced slow circles on the soft fabric of Lila's blanket. "She didn't know who I was," she said after a pause. If she had, she would have smiled, offered extra pillows, maybe even apologized in advance for turbulence. But she didn't know, so she judged. Ryan turned to her, eyes serious. "And that's exactly why it matters, because it shouldn't take a name on the plane's tail to earn respect. What if it hadn't been you? What if it were someone without a voice, without the power to text their husband mid-air?" Danielle nodded slowly. "Then they would have just taken the shame and moved on, like most do, like I've done before, like too many have." Ryan reached into his inner pocket and unfolded a small notepad. Lines were scribbled across it, notes on procedure, reform, ideas turned to resolve. "I want this to mean something," he said, sliding the notepad toward her. "Not just a temporary embarrassment, real change." She scanned the list. Policy reform, zero-tolerance clauses, visible breastfeeding rights, public reporting systems, no more silent discrimination. All of this? He nodded. And more. It won't be handled in the dark. The message has to be loud enough to echo across every gate, every crew briefing, every ticket counter. Danielle exhaled, her shoulders finally beginning to lower. "Good," she said, "because I'm done being quiet to keep others comfortable." Ryan smiled. Not a wide one, but full of pride. "You never raised your voice," he said. "But somehow, you were louder than anyone else." She gave him a tired smile. "Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room." He reached over and took her hand, fingers interlacing naturally. Outside, a new flight climbed into the dusk sky, its lights blinking against the clouds. Inside that lounge, something else took flight too. A promise, not one of revenge, but of resolve. Danielle knew this was more than a memory. It was a spark, the beginning of something new. That evening, across the city in a media suite at Airline headquarters, the corporate communications team sat tense. Screens lit up with mentions and tags. Forums buzzed. Tweets and whispers had begun spinning the day story out into the world. Marwa, the head of PR, tapped her pen nervously against the table. "We've got less than half a day before this story finds a headline." Ryan sat at the far end of the table, calm and still. "Then let's write our own. No defenses, no soft language, just the truth." Marwa pulled up a document. "Draft statement. Today, on one of our flights, a mother was treated in a way that falls far below the dignity our airline stands for. We apologize, and we are taking immediate public steps to ensure it never happens again. Add this, Ryan said. Mothers will be protected. Appearances will not determine worth. And the silence around bias ends now. Marwa nodded. We'll publish it tonight. Far from the glass boardrooms, Charlotte sat on the edge of her bed, still in uniform, though her jacket lay crumpled nearby. Her screen glowed with the subject line she dreaded. Suspension notice. She had imagined tears, rage, but all she felt was hollow. The words from the hearing played over in her head like a curse. You assumed I didn't belong? It wasn't just that flight. She had done it before. Subtle things, quick judgments, a glance that questioned someone's place. She looked in the mirror. For once, she didn't see a crew lead. She saw a woman who had spent a career making others feel small. Her phone was silent. No texts, no support. Just her and the truth. Back at headquarters, Ryan hovered over a final company-wide message. Attached were the new policies, transparent reporting systems, protections for mothers, and training that actually confronted reality. At the bottom, he typed the final words, "We serve not by status, but by humanity." He hit send, and with that, the change took flight, not in anger, not in noise, but in truth, the kind that speaks louder than judgment ever could. By the end of the day, the quiet ripple had turned into a wave. A travel blogger who had been seated just rows behind Danielle posted a thread online. Didn't know what I was seeing at first, it began. A mother being told to stop feeding her baby in first class. I assumed she was in the wrong, until I saw how calmly she sat while everything around her shifted. That post alone gathered over 20,000 shares by midnight. The next morning, a new letter appeared on the airline's official site, penned directly by Ryan himself. It didn't read like a press release. There was no legal padding, no vague phrasing, just one man speaking plainly. 3 days ago, a woman was made to feel like she didn't belong, not because of what she did, but because of how she looked. That woman was my wife. He paused the personal there and pivoted. But this statement isn't about that. It's about every person who has ever been doubted, displaced, or diminished for simply existing in a space they rightfully occupied. We built this airline on the belief that travel is for everyone, and in this moment, we forgot that. I take responsibility. He didn't stop there. Today, I'm announcing binding policy reforms that protect our passengers not based on class or connections, but on their humanity. The last line lit up across social platforms like a match in the dark. Dignity should fly first class. Every time. Danielle hadn't seen it at first. She only heard about it from a friend, then a cousin, and later from a stranger who passed her in a quiet bookstore, gave a nod, and simply said, "Thank you." That evening, with Lila asleep in her crib, Danielle curled onto the couch and read the statement for herself. She read slowly, not for recognition, but to feel the truth in it. To know this wasn't just about saying the right things. It had to mean something. As she scrolled, a stream of comments followed. Hundreds, thousands. This happened to me in 2018. They told me to use the bathroom. I've breastfed in secret on flights, scared of the stairs. It shouldn't take a co-owner's wife for change to happen. Danielle closed her eyes. Those words hit harder than she expected. She had thought she'd worked through the pain, but now she felt the full weight of how many women had carried this shame quietly. Her phone buzzed. A message from the airline's legal team. Attached was a formal apology from Charlotte. Danielle hesitated before opening it. To Mrs. Danielle Moore, you have no reason to read this. But I'm writing because I owe you something. A real apology. No excuses. No defenses. I looked at you and made a decision based on nothing but assumption. I made you feel like you didn't belong, not because you broke a rule, but because of how you looked. Your silence taught me more than any training ever has. I'm sorry. Not because I lost something, but because finally I saw something. Charlotte Danielle read it once, then again. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel powerful. She felt responsible, in a way that felt right, like maybe her quiet resistance had done more than punish someone. It had sparked self-reflection. She rose and stepped into Lila's room. The baby stirred softly, then settled again. Danielle leaned over the crib. "You were part of something bigger today," she whispered, "and someday you'll know exactly why it mattered." Downstairs, Ryan sat at his desk drafting one last note. Not for the public, not for the media, for the company's leadership. We don't lead by volume. We lead by what we protect. The quietest voice, the ignored passenger, the unseen mother, that's who we must answer to. He hit send. And just like that, the culture began to shift. Not from a scandal, not from PR pressure, from presence, from truth. From one mother in seat 1C who chose not to move. A week passed. The headlines didn't fade. They evolved. News outlets picked up the story, but instead of tabloid drama, there was respect. Mother's quiet strength sparks industry reform. Parenting blogs began publishing essays about the pressures of traveling with infants. Aviation forums swelled with discussion, not about one incident, but about the system. And among those voices, one comment stood out. We've all seen it. We've all stayed quiet. Maybe this is the moment we finally stop. At Airline headquarters, the HR inbox filled. But not with outrage, with gratitude, messages from former customers, notes from mothers who had avoided flights entirely. People, writing not to complain, but to say, "Thank you. I feel safe flying again." And Danielle, she kept quiet. No interviews, no statements. She didn't seek credit. Because she had already received the only thing that mattered. Real, lasting change. Then came the unexpected email. From the CEO of a competing airline. "Dear Mrs. Moore, thank you. Your courage reached farther than you'll ever know. After reading about what happened, we reviewed our policies, and they weren't good enough. We're fixing them. Not just for our passengers, but for our mindset. Thank you for showing us the mirror." Danielle sat quietly with the message. Not proud. Just awed. That something so small, a refusal to move, had echoed this far. Later that afternoon, she stood before a group of senior crew members at the airline's training center. Ryan had asked gently, "Will you speak to them? They need to hear this. From you." And so she did. "I'm not here because I filed a complaint," she began. "I didn't shout, I didn't demand lawsuits, I just stayed in my seat." She spoke plainly, honestly. She talked about the shame, the assumptions, the silence. "I was lucky," she said, "but not everyone is. That's why this matters." The room didn't erupt into applause. It didn't need to. One by one, the crew members stood, not in performance, in understanding. Afterwards, Maya approached her in the hallway. "I was there," she whispered, "on the flight. I wanted to say something. I was scared." Danielle smiled softly. "You saw. You cared. That matters too." She left that day not as a face from a headline, but as the start of a movement. Not born from noise, but from presence. The B. Following weeks brought real change. New training, clear policies, retraining for every single crew member across international hubs. A digital module appeared in the company portal. The first class moment. It opened with a single image. Danielle, seated, holding Lila, the caption read, "She didn't raise her voice, but the world heard her anyway." It didn't stop there. 4 other major airlines followed suit, signing a pledge called The Passenger. Respect Initiative. Together, they committed to better training, clearer protections for breastfeeding parents, and honest examinations of unconscious bias. One mother, one moment. And everything changed. Several major media networks across the globe began calling it something new, the Danielle effect. It wasn't just a trending headline, it was a shift in culture. It wasn't just about outrage, it was about reform. But while the world buzzed, Danielle stayed grounded. She kept her routines simple, changing diapers, nursing Lila, taking quiet walks with Ryan in the evenings. There were no speeches, no press tours, no selfies under spotlights. And yet, wherever she went, she felt the ripple, not always by face, but always by story. At the grocery store, a woman passed her with a knowing smile. At the pediatric clinic, a father waiting for his appointment nodded and said, "You're the one from the flight, right? My wife read your story to me. We both cried. Thank you." Each encounter left Danielle a little breathless, not because she craved fame, but because she understood now this was bigger than her. She hadn't asked to be a symbol, but she had become one. And now, it was her quiet responsibility to make sure the momentum didn't fade. One evening, as she stood in her kitchen brewing tea, her phone buzzed with a new email. She almost dismissed it, another among many, but the subject froze her. Subject, final note, from me, if you'll read it. It was from Charlotte. Danielle hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. She'd already received Charlotte's formal apology, a polished, corporate-appropriate statement. But this wasn't filtered through HR. This was something raw, personal. She tapped the message open. "Mrs. Moore, I know you've moved on. I know you have more important things to do than read another email from me. But I needed to send this, not through legal channels, not for company records, but from me, just me. Last week I lost my job. I'm not writing this to gain sympathy. I'm writing it because it was fair. I deserve to be held accountable. And for the first time in years, I truly saw what I had become. I thought I was a good flight leader. I believed I was protecting professionalism, safety, standards. But somewhere along the way, I started deciding who belonged. I judged people by instinct. I measured worth by how someone looked, how they spoke, what seat they sat in. I was wrong. You didn't yell at me. You didn't try to ruin me. You just stayed still. You let your presence do the work, and that silence, it's still ringing in my ears. I'm starting therapy next week. I'm trying to unlearn what I thought I knew. I don't think I'll work in aviation again, but I hope to raise my daughter into someone who doesn't repeat my mistakes, someone who sees, really sees, before she acts. Thank you for being the kind of person who stood still and let the world shift around her." Charlotte Danielle read the message twice. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. What she felt wasn't triumph. It was clarity, peace, not because Charlotte had suffered, but because Charlotte had grown. And maybe that was the real win. She typed a short reply. Change means the most when it comes from those who once caused the harm. That night, Danielle sat at the edge of Lila's crib, watching her daughter sleep beneath the soft white nightlight. Her tiny chest rose and fell steadily, wrapped in innocence. Danielle whispered gently, "I didn't choose this, but maybe it chose me for you." Downstairs, Ryan sat at his desk. The room was quiet except for the soft tapping of keys as he finished a final email to the company's leadership board. This wasn't for press. This wasn't for headlines. It was a reminder. We don't lead with power. We lead with protection. The quietest voice, the smallest presence. That's who we're accountable to. Always. He clicked send. The note was gone. But the change it signaled? That had only just begun. Sometimes the loudest change begins with quiet strength. Danielle didn't raise her voice, but by standing her ground, she helped rewrite the rules for everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. Real change doesn't need noise. It needs courage. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that remind us of the strength in stillness.